Welcome to the Natural Wisdom Podcast. I'm your host, Christine Backus. Today is Thursday, September 12th, 2024. And there's a heck of a lot going on. We're actually already into the beginning of the second eclipse season of the year, second and last. And that doesn't mean we've had an eclipse. It means that we had a new moon that sort of opened the portal into eclipse season. And the first eclipse of this part of the year comes up on Tuesday, and that is a full moon at 25 degrees of Pisces. So if you're astro savvy and you know where that is in your chart, it can give you some clues as to how you might experience this lunar eclipse energy. And the main thing to know about eclipses is that they bring unpredictable energy, unpredictable change. And because this is a lunar eclipse, and it may very well bring things out of the past. But the most important reason that I wanted to talk and mention that eclipse as I set up for what we're going to talk about today is that it's going to give us some clues into some of the themes we're going to be working with for a long time to come. This full moon eclipse, lunar eclipse, is in between Saturn and Neptune in the tropical sign of Pisces. And one of the biggest astrological alignments of the time it starts next year in 2025, but then it finalizes and perfects, as they say, gets exact in February of 2026. And that is that planet of reality, 3D form, integrity, and manifestation, Saturn, is going to come together, conjoin the planet of dreams and imagination and illusion and delusion, Neptune. And that, as I said, begins next summer, 2025. Those planets will start to meet. They won't come exactly together, but they'll be very, very close beginning next year. And then they'll come exactly together in 2026. And this full moon lunar eclipse, the moon is just about right in the middle of those two planets. And so in a way, you can think of it as bridging their energies and starting to show us what some of the themes are that we're going to be working with. And yeah, let me back up for a little bit and just talk about where we are. And this probably isn't the first time you've heard this from me, and it's likely not going to be the last time you've heard this from me. But we are in a concentrated period of change. And I think we all know that because we're all feeling that everything feels uncertain. There's a lot of conflict and strife. There's a lot of talk in some communities about we're in this sort of splitting of the worlds, where some people see the world one way and others see it completely differently. And even though I think in some ways that's not unusual, certainly if you have traveled the world at all, you know that not everybody sees the world the same way, and we don't experience it the same way. But now what we're seeing is that even people in the same area, and looking at the same elephant, for instance, if you think about the old blind man thing, if you're looking at the same thing, we can have totally different views about what's really going on. And that has become more and more and more pronounced over the last several years. So we're in this very concentrated period of conflict and change and uncertainty. And astrologically, it started in earnest in 2020, right, with the Saturn-Pluto conjunction in January of 2020. And then we had Jupiter and Pluto come together that year. And then we ended with Saturn and Jupiter. And so what we started with was crisis, contraction, breakdown. That was Saturn-Pluto at the beginning of the year. And there were other planets involved as well. And then we had Jupiter, Pluto, which were like magnification of power issues 3 times during the year. And we could point to some specific actions and circumstances that coincided with those. But we all know that things didn't kind of happen once and then go away. They happened and then they kept coming back and amplified over and over. That was the Jupiter-Pluto influence. And then at the end of 2020, we had the beginning of a new cycle. And I've talked about this again many times, but it was the Saturn-Jupiter conjunction. It's called the Great Conjunction. Many of us watched those two slow-moving planets kind of come together and cross and come back together. But they came together at 0 degrees of Aquarius on the solstice in 2020. So again, kind of a unique date. Anything that happens on a solstice or an equinox has extra power because it's happening at sort of a portal time when the sun is in, particularly at the solstice, right? Sun was in a rebirth period. And so that Saturn-Jupiter conjunction coming when the sun was at its own rebirth, coming at 0 degrees of Aquarius, also an important degree, anytime 0 or 29, those are very important degrees. And so it was very much a new beginning. And that Saturn-Jupiter conjunction always represents new beginnings in society in 20-year cycles, as well as when it happens the way it did in 2020, it also began a new 200-year cycle with these conjunctions in air signs pointing to very different issues than the past 200 years when the conjunctions have been in earth signs. And so we go from like an industrial age to an information age, which, as we know, we've already been entering for a while. So that was 2020. The themes of everything shifted. The old power structures starting to break down and crumble. Pluto often shows us what's been hidden. And so there, depending on where you're coming from, you saw a lot of, well, you probably no matter depending on where you were coming from, you saw a lot of things that have been simmering under the surface and hidden kind of come out and come up for us to see. And I mean shadowy, dark things coming up to be seen. So that was 2020. And then again, ending with this new beginning in the social order and in information and how we relate to each other and how we communicate with each other. And well, AI is an obvious kind of new thing that has been getting more and more prominent over the last few years. And that's also been connected with one of the big, slower moving planets, Pluto, planet of power, control, underworld, death and decay, moving from Capricorn into Aquarius. That happened for the first time in 2023 and will happen for the last time in just about 2 months in November of this year. And that also kind of changes some big collective themes, again, from material and industrial and structural kinds of things in Capricorn now to Aquarius, and that's Earth, now to Aquarius air, more about social order, and Pluto, again, very disruptive force. So that was 2020. We had these big shifts. We've had other shifts since then in terms of outer planets, a little bit of movement. We always have changes. It's one of the realities of life. And we're always in the midst of many big cycles. But 2020 was like a big, almost like a trigger point for a period of very concentrated change. And that's what we're in the midst of right now. And this period ends to the extent that we ever have these periods truly ending, right? There's kind of a culmination point, an exclamation point, if you will, to this period of change as the planets Saturn and Neptune come together in the sky. And that is the Saturn, planet of reality, 3D, commitment. It's about bringing things into form, and Neptune, ideals, inspiration, what's invisible, consciousness itself. And that's the culmination point. And it happens at 0 degrees of Aries, which is the spring equinox point, the April equinox or March equinox point. And that's when the sun gets to that halfway point between the solstices. And again, because it's also the first degree of the zodiac, the way astrologers use it, It's considered, like the December solstice, it's considered a world axis point. And in a way, one of the descriptions I like best of that zero Aries point is where the individual and the collective coincide. And so this finale of the 7-year period with the Saturn-Neptune conjunction at the equinox point, not on the equinox, but at the equinox point in 2026 in February. This is a time when dreams and reality meet. So I want to talk more about sort of this kind of backdrop that we're in. In fact, the other thing I want to mention, so keep that in mind, that we have this culmination point in February of 2026. It starts next year as the planets get very close together. We get some clues to it on Tuesday at the time of the lunar eclipse. So you can start to kind of think about what's coming up for you and what you see around you in this next few days. But the other big shift that's happening, and we've started to see it with Pluto, is that all three of the outer planets, planets beyond Saturn, the invisible planets, the transpersonal planets, the planets that serve as kind of collective backdrops for everything else that's going on, we do get impacted by them personally. But their real significance is, as one person calls it, it's like we're having a big shift in the zeitgeist, right? The spirit of the times is what you could point to with these outer planets. And what's so unique about what's happening in the next couple of years with these outer planets, one person says it hasn't happened for thousands of years. I can't verify that, but it's certainly been a long time. All three of these planets are in a harmonious conversation with each other, and they are all three shifting from earth and water signs, quote unquote, feminine signs, into air and fire signs, quote unquote, quote, masculine signs, at the same time, within a year to 2 years of each other. Pluto, Uranus, Neptune are all shifting into different signs. Now, these planets all shift signs it depends, right? 7 to 20 years. Depends on the planet, depends on where it is in its orbit. Pluto is the slowest moving, the furthest away, and it shifts signs every 13 to 20 years. It's been in Capricorn for about 15 years. It's shifting into Aquarius this November for the last time. It's been back and forth a little bit since early 2023. And it's going to be in Aquarius for about 20 years. And where Pluto is shows what's being disrupted, where the shadows are coming to light, where there's kind of a death and rebirth going. And it's not like a constant, but if you think about where Pluto has been 15 years in Capricorn, death and rebirth of the financial system, right? The banking crisis came at the time that Pluto shifted into Capricorn. A lot of institutional shadows and structures. I think if you look around, and I'm most familiar with the US, of course, living here. If you look around at how we look at our institutions in the US right now, you know it's very different than the way we looked at it 15 years ago, right? There's a lot less trust. We've seen a lot more corruption. There's a lot more corruption being exposed right now during this particular election cycle. And the US is in a unique position because Pluto is back where it was when we were born as a country. So our country is going through its own death and rebirth process right now. And again, if you're an American, and even if you're not an American and you're watching what's going on with our election cycle, you might think it looks a little nuts and a little scary because we are in that very deep Plutonian process of dying to the old and being born to the new, and we don't know what the new looks like yet. And again, when we kind of back up to that Saturn-Neptune conjunction, same thing. We're going to be born into some kind of new manifestation of an ideal. We don't know what that looks like yet. But back to the outer planets for a moment. So that's Pluto, the slowest moving into Aquarius for 20 years. It's got a 250-year cycle. So hasn't been in Aquarius for 250 years when the US was born. Then the next planet kind of in the lineup is Neptune. It's the second furthest out, right? Neptune, the god or goddess of the ocean. Neptune has to do with our connection with the numinous, with our imagination, with the ideal, with compassion to some degree, unconditional love. It's a difficult planet to describe because we're talking about the things we really have a hard time describing in all facets of life, right? You could call it connection with God, connection with consciousness, connection with what there's a Latin term called the nous. Latin term, I think it is, the nous, which means that in between, like where you connect with somebody at a soul level, connect with somebody in a non-physical level. So that's Neptune, and that's where it operates, and that's what it relates to in our lives, is that sort of non-physical, the other side. And it's shifting signs. It's from Pisces, which has many of the same kinds of meanings as Neptune itself, although Neptune's a planet, so it actually is an action. It's an actor, whereas Pisces is kind of the field. And so Neptune has been in Pisces for some years. I can't remember how long. It's got a 165-year cycle. So what, 15 years-ish, 13 to 15 years. And Neptune will be shifting into Aries at the same time that it comes together with Saturn. And so Neptune shifting from Pisces to Aries, again, very different feel, right? We go from this very dreamy, lots of illusion, lots of delusion, lots of access to imagination. We go from that kind of realm, and then Neptune goes into Aries. And if you start to think about even just playing with the keywords for these entities, if you play with the keywords of Neptune, ideals, illusions, and then the keywords for Aries, everything from selfhood and pioneering and becoming to war and that sort of very impulsive area, then those are the kinds of things that you can start to play with. Is what does that mean? What does it mean for Neptune to go into Aries? Not something I'm prepared to go into deeply today, except that when I started playing with keywords the other day, I got things like idealization of war, right? New cycle of inspiration might be one. A war of ideals, wars based on ideals, idealistic wars, impulsive dreams, wars over water. Neptune rules water. Neptune also has to do with oil, wars over oil. That's not new, right? That's old. Masculine ideals, extremist religions. Aries also has to do with fertility. It relates to the head and heads of state. So you can start to see some of the possibilities of Neptune shifting into Aries. So now we've talked about Pluto into Aquarius, Neptune into Aries, and the third planet to shift signs is the planet Uranus. Uranus went into Taurus in 2018, I think it was 2018, 2019, somewhere in that period. And it had come out of Aries. So Uranus is the planet of breakdowns, breakthroughs, sudden change, rules things like lightning and sudden events and turnarounds and big reversals. And it's been in the sign of Taurus that has to do with agriculture, the body, the earth itself. We've seen volcanic eruptions, earthquakes, which we see all the time, but they've been maybe a little bit more prevalent during this Uranus and Taurus period. And we've seen a lot of radical, that's a Uranus word, shifts with how we view the body, how we view agriculture, fake food, a lot of fake food, a lot of Franken food has come up during this Uranus and Taurus tour. The whole issue with transsexuality and transitioning from male to female and radical changes to the body have come up with Uranus and Taurus. So now Uranus in the same time frame, and I forgot the date, I don't have the date handy, but in this same time frame, I think it dips in next year in 2025, shifts from Taurus into Gemini. And so again, zeitgeist, right? Think about spirit of the times, the issues and things that we are dealing with. Sorry about the lighting getting weird. The sun's coming out here. Uranus shifts into Gemini, and we go from issues around the physical realm, which is an earth sign, Taurus, right, into issues of Gemini, which is an air sign. Gemini has a lot to do with language and communication and how we connect with each other. And with Pluto and Aquarius, Aquarius having to do with social structure. There's a technological piece too, and science is part of Aquarius's realm. And then we get into Gemini, language and connection and communication. And you can see, again, those air sign realms, those sort of like thought, ideas, as well as how we express them, all up for some radical shifts. And it's not a stretch to think that some of the language and capabilities of AI are going to be radically shifting under Uranus and Gemini. Maybe just how we communicate in general could come up. Uranus and Gemini also relates to conflict with neighbors and potential, again, it's another potential war signal with that shift, and particularly with the Saturn, Neptune, and Neptune itself in Aries. So again, what I wanted to convey is that we have this, by 2026, 2027, everything's going to be different. And in some ways, we can't even see. Well, in many ways, we don't know what it's going to be like. We know it's not a continuation of the past, but that's one of it's not as if the human imagination is limited. It's really not. I mean, look at what has been imagined and created by humans over time, right? It's pretty remarkable. It's pretty amazing. But unless we're truly open to something that we potentially have never imagined, we won't have a sense of what's coming. It could be pretty dramatic. Maybe it won't be dramatic in the moment. Sometimes these things are things where you look back and go, oh, right, it's all different since then. 2020 was traumatic in the moment, right? It was very dramatic in the moment. And we look back and see from maybe a longer perspective, we can see we'll have more perspective on it. But okay, so what I want to say, and the point of all this, and what's important to me with this whole conversation, is that rather than just play out the drama, oh my gosh, everything's going to be different, there's so much potential for bad things, on the collective level, because we're talking about everybody, and the shadows sometimes get magnified on the collective level, there is definite potential for some things that we're not going to like, right? And there's definite potential for wars and this and that and the other. However, you as an individual, I as an individual, what we focus on, what we do in this time matters a lot. And that's the whole point of this podcast. It's also the whole point of a free workshop I did last month, which you can still access, and I'll put the link in the show notes. And it's also the whole point of a paid workshop I'm doing on September 20th. That link will also be in the notes. And it's also the whole point of a longer term program I'm going to start in November. But rather than this just being a sales pitch, what I want to say to you is that what you focus on in this moment right now has power and makes a difference. And one of the questions I want to ask is, what are you prepping for? Right? If you're like a lot of the people I know, there's been a lot of prepper, right? Prepping. It's get a bunker, fill it with food. If you're in Montana, like, yeah, usually there's a lot of firearms too, because we're a gun culture here. And it's like a preparation for disaster, a preparation for some kind of exponentially worse situation than the lockdowns in 2020. That's one way to prep, right? And there's nothing wrong with it. If that's something that you're called to do, and that seems like something that that's important for you, there's absolutely nothing wrong with that kind of prepping. And there's another way to prep. The other way to prep is to focus on what you want. What future do we want to create together? What future that's more positive, that's more towards your ideal? What are you available for? It's very common. I don't know if I'd say it's easier, except that our cultural training and cultural programming tends to mostly put us in the prepping for the worst. What is it? Prepare for the worst, expect the best, that sort of thing. You can't do both. You can't prepare for the worst and expect the best. You have to put your attention and your focus and your energy towards what you want. That doesn't mean that you can't have, a store of food, but it means that where you spend your time and attention, where you spend your focus is what's going to be amplified in your life. And this is especially important with this Saturn-Neptune conjunction, right? The meaning of dreams, imagination, what you're putting out in that other realm, or what you're pulling in from that other realm with 3D reality, concrete form, materialization. When these planets come together, they tend to bring things into the real. They tend to bring things from the ideal into the real. And one good example is the rise of communism in the Soviet Union. That was 2 or 3 conjunctions ago. And then in 1989, the last time these two planets came together, I think that was the last time. The last time these two planets came together, it was the fall of the Berlin Wall. So the rise of the Soviet Union, and then the fall of the Berlin Wall. And in both cases, we saw an ideal come into reality. Now, this particular coalescence of forces doesn't have to be like all the ideal that all of us have, right? It could be an ideal forced upon us by Saturn, for instance, by the old version of Saturn. And again, I don't know, but I do know, and I'm not predicting one way or the other, and I'm not going to predict doom and gloom, because there's still time for one thing. And it matters what you and I decide to do over this next couple of years. And so one of the things I'll say is that, well, one of the most important things I think that any of us can do right now is deeply listening to our hearts and acting from there, and deeply listening to our gut and acting from there. And when I say deeply listening, as you know, I'm talking about accessing your natural wisdom, that innate, that part of you that's connected to Neptune land, connected to nature, connected to what's not right in front of our faces and what we're not being fed to, but what's what's the source, right? That's one word people use for it. We're all expressions of that. We all have access to that. And so one of the things I'm saying is that it's super important to spend time with yourself and in that quiet place where you have access to the greater realm, the greater field of consciousness, to God, whatever you call it, great spirit. And then to act from that place, right? That's what we're talking about, is acting from that place. And to me, the highest expression of the Saturn-Neptune conjunction and our way to work with it is to focus on the dream, focus on the utopian ideal, focus on what you want the world to look like, and then stay the course act from that place. Let all your actions be guided by that ideal and that dream and where you want to go, and focus on the future that you want. Your attention is a form of love. What you give your attention to is what you love. What you give your attention to is what grows and what you nurture and what you nourish. And so attention, that dream world, that fantasy world where you spend time is what you will feed in your life. And this is, the secret, what my one of the things I think the secret is incomplete because there's a lot of focus on positive thinking, right? Staying focused on your ideal, all the things that I'm talking about in terms of like harnessing and working with and cooperating with Neptune. But the other piece that's necessary is taking action over time. That's Saturn's realm, right? What are you going to do to stay in integrity with yourself and to bring your dreams into form? Saturn's realm. How are you going to focus, Saturn? How are you going to, again, stay in integrity? And how are you going to kind of stay the course and lead? That's another Saturn term. And this is, in a lot of ways, being driven from and living from the inside out. And it's not as if we don't respond to what's going on around us, and we don't respond to some of the things that bring up fear, but it's not acting from that fear. It's acting from what we love and what we want, what we desire. So I think I've said enough. I did a whole 45-minute workshop on this recently. We did some energy practices, just some meditation practices, some journaling. And in my intensive on September 20th, which is 4 hours, we're going to be looking at charts, individual charts. We'll be doing more energy work. We'll be doing more specific work on how to break the lock of the fear, maybe how to break some of the negative thought loops that we get stuck in, of lack and scarcity and what could go wrong, and preparing for the worst. And we'll also be working with what we want to call in, the energies that we want to call in, both collectively and individually. So we'll be doing more of that work on September 20th. You can access the free workshop for another day or two. I think I have it scheduled to be taken down tomorrow or the next day. I might extend that a little bit. And again, the link will be in the show notes. But in any case, whether you go and listen to that, whether you join me on the 20th or not, whether you come to me for coaching and doing some individual work around this or not, think about where your attention is. How much of your day is spent looking at the media, or doom scrolling, or looking at the potential negative scenarios that could unfold, whether you're an American, it's out of the election, whether it's something else and you're somewhere else. Where are you spending your attention? What are you putting your focus on? And I would urge you to spend at least a little time where you carve out every day a period where you just focus on what you have, right? It's the gratitude practice, but also how it would feel to be in your ideal future. Let's all focus on that and see how we can create our golden age, our new golden age. If you've listened to me talk about Saturn, that's part of what I talk about. And we create our new golden age here on Earth as we cooperate and co-create with this incredibly rich time in the cosmos. Thank you for listening. Thank you so much for being a listener for the Natural Wisdom Podcast. I love hearing your feedback and comments. Feel free to send me a note. You can do that through my website, christinebackus.com, or the naturalwisdompodcast.com. You might be able to do it through the podcast platform you're listening to as well. You certainly can find me on social media. Take care. Happy eclipse season. Happy full moon. And I'll talk to you again very soon.